First, I'm going to introduce Mike Wagstaff, if you could raise your hand so they know who you are. Mike is the president and CEO of Holiday Oil. It's a local Utah company with more than 500 employees. Holiday was founded in 1964 by Mike's father, Jerry Wagstaff. Mike began his career at Holiday as a cashier and advanced through the ranks before becoming president in 2003. Under his leadership, the company has grown from 34 stores to 60 stores, with 2 more in construction phase. Mike's Milk, a distribution company, was added to the Holiday umbrella last year. Mike holds a bachelor's in marketing. He's a member of the Chevron Marketers Council and was previously president of the Utah Petroleum Marketers and Retailers Association. Amplēo is what that's called. All right, I figured I'd try it. Mike enjoys biking, water skiing, and spending time with his wife and 4 children. James Peterson is the CFO of Holiday Oil. James started his career at Holiday from 2008 as a payroll manager. He left in 2010 and worked in other industries, gaining valuable experience as well as a master's degree before returning to Holiday in 2017. As CFO, James manages and oversees the financial functions of the Holiday companies, which include Wagstaff Investments, Holiday Oil, Holiday Trucking, and Mike's Milk. Under his leadership, the investment portfolio and dividends have grown substantially. He's integral in guiding the company in the management of its assets, along with a healthy growth strategy. James enjoys hiking, pheasant hunting, and spending time with his wife and 3 children. He holds a bachelor's and master's in accounting. Why pheasant hunting, though? What's the deal with pheasants? Is there something special about a pheasant?
They're a lot easier to clean than a big big animal. So.
Those of you who know that,
mess, yeah.
You belong here with Mike. Or excuse me, with James. Okay, for Divvy, we've got Blake Murray, the co-founder and CEO at Divvy. Blake, raise your hand. A lot of people probably know Blake. He seems to be on the speaking circuit nowadays in Utah. So Blake, he's the leader in spend and expense management, and one of the fastest, Divvy is the leader in spend and expense management and one of the fastest growing financial technology companies in the country. Blake co-founded Divvy in 2016 after seeing firsthand how archaic, time-consuming, and expensive it was for his business to capture and manage total spend. Under Blake's leadership, Divvy has redefined the financial tech stack for more than 3,500 businesses, raised $260 million in venture capital, and secured $750 million in debt and capital markets. As CEO, Blake focuses on recruiting top-tier talent and working with his executive team to create a culture aligned with the company's mission to make money smarter. So if you don't know about Divvy's, I said this, I was at an event that Blake spoke at recently, and I had to pitch this virtual card. It's the best thing since sliced bread if you're a CFO. You got to try this thing. It's amazing. You can set up a couple pushes of the button, and you can set up a virtual card for a vendor. It's amazing. We'll explain that to you later. I'll pitch him a little bit further later. Blakely Craigan is the Senior Vice President of Finance at Divvy. Blakely, as Senior Vice President of Finance, Blakely provides strategic guidance for all debt and equity financing for the company. Since joining Divvy in August 2018, he's led 2 rounds of debt financing totaling $750 million and 1 round of equity financing for $200 million. His past experience includes building the corporate strategy and development team at Instructure, where he managed all internal and external strategic investments, including acquisition of the video microlearning company Practice. At Instructure, he helped close $25 million in debt financing and $40 million in VC funding before helping to lead the company's successful IPO in 2015. Blakely began his career in finance at Dell, where he helped its deal team close more than $2 billion in acquisitions. We have a really experienced group here, and frankly, very successful group. So what I want to do is focus a little bit on those relationships, but Dave talked a little bit about the CFO as a champion of growth. And for the CEOs on the panel, if you would, maybe, and this wasn't one of the questions we talked about in advance, but it would be really nice to know what 1 or 2 things you think your CFO can do to become a champion of growth in your company. Thoughts?
So for me, I guess that champion piece ends up being really one of the main things for me is emotional intelligence, of being able to deal with other people in the organization is one of the main functions I see. Like was mentioned earlier, right? They get to sit up in the cockpit, they see everything, And if they can't relate to and project that, if you will, theme of what you're trying to accomplish, if it's growth, whatever that theme is, that's really one of the key things. So from a personality perspective, I think that makes a huge difference.
I think Blakely's been incredibly unique for Divvy. At least he's opened our eyes as to, and I'll get into this a little bit later, differences between a good and a great finance leader. Blakely, it's none of it has had to be taught. It's totally intuitive. His focus on revenue, right? There's just inherent alignment and focus on revenue, where a CFO or a finance team can be distracted by so many different internal functions from a controls perspective that he has invested a significant amount of time, energy, his own brain share, his mind share on being revenue focused, which then has a logical corollary of he spends a lot of his time with Sterling Snow, right, our head of revenue, with the marketing team, and understanding how to, if a flywheel exists, from revenue to marketing to customer success that we really try to create inside of Divvy, he tries to understand his role of how to breathe life into that. So it's a revenue focus instead of being a gatekeeper there.
Beautiful. Do you see, have you seen the difference as a CEO, the difference between a controller or an accountant and your CFO in that place? Is that, it seems to me that's a big difference between what you'd consider a strategic CFO and something else.
And I can speak from a perspective of a startup, especially as a newer startup. You go through different phases of what's needed, right? At the very beginning, you only need the very basics of bookkeeping and accounting and making sure that you're not being financially irresponsible, right? And so actually even prior to Blakely or our controller, Tommy, we were using Dave Chase and working with Dave's organization just so that we had the rudimentary framework of a financial ecosystem that could come to life inside of Divvy. But then we have Tommy Ashton, who's our controller, and Tommy, I think, ends up being a reprieve strategically for Blakely, because Tommy is our controller. He can take on the more day-to-day tasks and the operational side of making sure the books are balanced, the accounting function as well, and allows Blakely now to be, we're using, I guess, this analogy of being in the cockpit. It allows him to take that long-term view and align with the vision that I have to make sure that, again, he's protecting us, but then leaning in on the revenue side. But without Tommy, he probably is hampered in his ability to do that.
No, and I would agree with that. So that's where we're trying to develop and build out to be able to give James more of an opportunity as the CFO to be able to see more of what's going on operationally. So he does have influence there because of the knowledge, that he has with the numbers of being able to understand that side of it and be able to help, I guess, manage that and influence in operation. So ultimately it does take, I guess, many different roles to make a CFO allow them to have the time to do what's needed in the company to influence other departments.
Yeah, I agree with that. It was a leading question to some degree, but in truth, a lot of CFOs spend a lot of time doing controller work. That's not atypical, right. And it seems to be a value to the company's growth to be focused on strategy. So a question for the CFOs on the panel. This is a little bit of a setup because I'd like to hear I think the group would like to hear the different perspectives on the most valuable assets, the most valuable capabilities and skills that you think you bring to the table as a CFO or a finance executive in your company.
I'll take a stab at it. So I think we have a really cool opportunity as a finance leader to be focused on the future. Like I'm living in 2020 and 2021 right now while the team is executing to hit year-end goals. In my head, I already know what the year-end goal is going to be. I know where we're going to land, so I get to live in the future. That's a huge benefit to the company, though, because I can now look at what the growth objectives are over the future, what the profitability growths are for the future, what our cash flow growths are for the future, and I can say, how do I build out that infrastructure? How do I help all of these different functions across our business build out that infrastructure so that they can have a successful 2020, so that they can hit all the goals that the business needs to hit? I think having that focus where you can look into the future is a key ability, but then setting up that infrastructure to hit the goal. And then lastly, I start creating what the guardrails are going to be, not only now, but in the future. And I think of the guardrails of a CFO as a freeing function. Let me give you an example. Blake is a super aggressive dude. He wants to grow like gangbusters all the time. So does our head of revenue. They just want to go bananas and crazy all the time. I want them to. I want them constantly be thinking of the craziest, most insane things that we can do to grow our business. And I can be the guardrails. I can be like, well, Blake, that one's actually stupid. Let me explain why. But I love these other three that you came up with. But I think of it as a freeing function and allowing the teams to get more brainstorming. They don't have to be their own controls. I can be their controls for them. I think that's one of the key strengths. And then lastly, I'd say is one of the key objectives of or capabilities of a CFO is the CFO sees all the complexity of the business, right? And a lot of the other peers on the executive team don't understand the complexity and the nuance that's in the business. And there's two folds here. Internally, I think the job of the CFO is to, while communicate complexity simply, it's also to make sure that they understand the importance of some of that complexity without overwhelming them. So you're trying to make complex things simple internally. And then even externally, so we're a company that's high growth, we have a lot of investors, we need to keep happy. And one of the things we work really hard on is making sure that our business is as simple as possible in their eyes. They don't need to understand any of that nuance. That's my job. And internally, once again, let me repeat, it's just understanding that there is complexity, but trying to make it as simple as possible.
I love that. It sounds like taking those complex things is an important part of your overall finance function, accounting function, but bringing to the table all those people who need to stay high level, helping them to stay high level is what I think I'm hearing, at least in part. What do you think, James?
So I replaced someone that had been the CFO at Holiday Oil for 45 years. When Mike brought me on, we talked about the technical side to make sure I could handle all that. But we talk about a lot about emotional intelligence at work, and what he wanted from me was to change the culture in our corporate office so that we could build the infrastructure to grow. We're kind of a different animal with 60 stores, and we have to support people all over the place instead of just one central location. There's a lot that goes into that. It's really complicated when you're getting thousands of invoices from different locations, and you need to have the right people in the right seats. And so Mike, brought me on to put the people in the right seats and to help grow Holiday Oil with the correct infrastructure so we could grow as lean as possible and as fast as possible, because we're doing it's a mind shift. We're a very conservative company, and we're turning that into a growth company, which is exciting. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
I love it. So I hear making complex things simple, culture change, living in the future, which may sound bad, living in 2020 and 2020, living in your forecast, executing your forecast, and the CFO being a freeing function and actually being guardrails. So I'm curious, from the CEO side, what's your perspective? Not just on those, but what's your perspective separate of that? What are the most important functions or skills and assets that your CFO can bring to the table or does bring to the table?
So for me, you've got the basics, right? Every month for us of looking at the P&Ls, being able to review all the financial information. For us, almost even more important than the financial information is we have key metrics that we look at each one of our stores. So getting that information out on a timely basis to be able to get that information back so we can make decisions and change what we're doing and alter what we're doing to be able to be profitable, that ends up being a key thing. And so turnaround of information, as James mentioned, all the different invoices, the information that comes in from all of these different locations that we have, and being able to turn that around quickly to be able to get that information back is a key piece and of making those things happen. So there's so many, I guess, different aspects of the CFO of being able to balance all of those different areas. James has done a great job of being able to really came in and still, to some degree, he still does a lot of the controller work, but being able to stick his head above that of the fray and being able to look at it from a strategic standpoint. So again, I keep going back to this emotional intelligence. It was interesting when I interviewed for this position, I met many different accountants, controllers / CFOs that wanted to work at Holiday Oil. But really what influenced me the most is that James had this ability to deal with people. And I'd had the opportunity, obviously, of working with him years before when he was in our company, so I knew that about him. And I can't stress enough how much that makes a difference to me as a CEO, to be able to know that James or the CFO can go out and deal emotionally with the other employees and solve problems, right? And be able to deal with the tough issues that go on. There's always some turn, things are happening, people problems are just ongoing. Everybody has a life, everybody has problems, and being able to deal with those things has made a huge difference for us.
So I tried to think of it, and if you'll afford me the ability, I'm going to actually recite some stuff from my phone. I tried to think of it and break it down into good versus great. I think the majority of all of us aspire to be great at our given profession. It's necessary. It's a condition precedent in order to be part of a growth company that that you address the table stakes first, and then you just move past those, right? Those are what keeps the light on. And so I think of the table stakes as the bookkeeping, the accounting, some of those core functions that we already mentioned. But then some of the great that we see in Blakely and that we looked for in the right financial leader is some of the following. Again, I already mentioned revenue focus and alignment, so they work very closely with myself and some of the other leaders on the revenue team. They're a true business partner. I kind of think of, when I thought of what business partner means, because it can mean any number of things, I think to all of us, it's a sparring partner, right? It's where Blakely and I can literally go at it day in and day out, and then we're still going out to lunch with each other the same day, right? We can move past what we may have argued about or had a tough discussion about, but we can be that sparring partner with incredible intellectual honesty as well. If any of you are Twitter followers, I'm a Twitter lurker, like Mitt Romney, if you're following that thread right now, and not very active in terms of tweeting myself. But if you're following an interesting thread in Twitter of executives, it's about fight or flight, right? That response that many of us have with challenging times, and that applies to work as well. When the hard problems in business arise, do you run towards them or do you run away from them? And both Blakely and I are totally aligned in that we run towards them immediately. There's no part of us, to the extent that if we find something else or find something out, like on Tuesday morning, if we were to get an email right now, we would be obsessing about closing this down so we could go address it instead of punting it down the road. That's just our DNA and how we think about that kind of stuff. You have to ask the right strategic questions. That is absolutely necessary from a finance leader perspective. It's understanding, actually, and it's knowing which questions to ask, but being able to ask the right strategic questions, which then some of that corollary, the bullet points, is that you understand your competition in the business that you're in, and not just the business that you're running. You have to own the data room and keep it live for additional financing events. You may not be running a business that requires or relies on venture capital, right? That's not, we hope to at some point not be that type of business, but we are for now. But the majority of businesses do need additional financing facilities or have capital needs, and maintaining that data room and understanding where you are from a data perspective is, in my opinion, totally necessary, and they own that 100%. That's not a burden that I have to think about, that any other team, the finance team, owns that. Comms to stakeholders. So we got lucky in that we had a diamond in the rough. I thought when we were hiring Blakely that we were getting a strong strategic mind, then all the condition precedents that we blew past, kind of the good stuff, but what we got was an incredible communicator. His ability to understand that not all audiences are created equal, and that you have to be able to take your message and shift it to the level of acumen that your audience has, what they're going to find important, and what's necessary for them also from an understanding perspective. And so being able to manage those stakeholders and communicate to them is really, really important. One other element in communication, though, is not just about verbal communication. The majority of us, for good or bad, are very visual beasts. It's how do you take business matters and throw them into kind of the classic PowerPoint deck, right? But make it very easy to understand. I think one of our strengths at Divvy is storytelling, but it's also not just the startup story. Kind of who cares about that? It's being able to tell the story of your business in a very concise manner in 8 to 12 slides where anybody can look at it, and without having to speak to Divvy, they understand, or to Blakely, they understand exactly what we're doing, where we're going, and how we're going to get there, right? And being able to put that. That's comms, in my opinion. And the last one, like I already mentioned, is being that gatekeeper, that sparring peer, which is, honestly, that's just how we interact with each other, and I'd say that's our most important part of our relationship.
Great answers. Thank you, all of you. Those are phenomenal. What if we talk a little bit about strategy in the CFO's office, and especially if you're looking forward and living in 2020 and 2021, and you're owning that data room and owning the future, basically, of the company, or the financial future of the company. What part then? If you take that and then add to that, what part does the CFO play in the strategy of the business, in developing that strategy? So not just holding the data room, not just communicating it. How about developing strategy? Is there a part there for you? How do you see that? Any one of you? I'd love to hear from all of you.
I'd be happy to jump in. Half of my career has been in strategy organizations, and I think I naturally gravitate towards that side of the business because I feel like that's where the most value can be added, and from a financial perspective. Blake calls it table stakes versus value add. That's kind of how I think about it too. So what can we do from a strategic perspective is, a lot of times is when you're early stage venture company, I'm sure it's very different for Holiday Oil, is we've found the beginnings of the business, and we know where our product market fit is, and we know how to get our revenue up and our trajectory. That's phase one, though, of a startup. Phase one is just, let's get it going, let's get the growth going. Phase two is, though, okay, what is our plan to keep that growth going, but now we have to flip the priorities from just finding product market fit to getting cash flow positive and to becoming a highly profitable, highly valuable company that anybody would consider valuable. And it's painting that picture of what are the steps that we need to take to get to this profitability. And I don't mean just like, hey, this needs to get better, this number here. I mean, what types of products do we need to be offering the customers? What kind of margin thresholds do they need to be generating, contribution margin to the business? How big do they need to be? What % of our business can be X type of product versus Y? What are the growth layers? What level of risks are we going to be willing to take to balance that growth, et cetera? I think that's a lot of times where my job is. So example is, we look over in 2020, and we see that we look in 2020, 2021, 2022, and we say, oh, we want to be in a certain place in 2022. Well, as a finance person, it's important for me to understand that, hey, that first year we launch a new product or 3 new products or whatever it is, we can't expect it to be a game changer in year one. Now, I want my product teams to think that it's going to be a game changer in that immediate year one. I want them to be shooting for it, and I want them to have all the incentives in the world to go make it a game changer in year one. But I need to be the guy who's balancing out a reasonable expectation for some of these goals, and what can we expect in year one versus year two versus year three, so that we can get to where we need to be in that end state.
Can I actually address that real quick? Because that's been a critical piece to our success, is we've never missed our numbers at all. And so we've been able to balance having, again, kind of the revenue function, but then product with full alignment of trying to take moonshots, right? They're trying to go to the moon, and so they have quote-unquote numbers. But Blakely and I and the finance team, is that we message with them, we align with them, but then we also build the financial model to make sure that we are always safe. No matter what, we have our safety net ingrained into the business, and we never get out in front of ourselves against that safety net. And so we build, I imagine similar to all of you, right? You have different functional models, but any one of them can be operational models. And so we have stretch quota and budget. We always operate off our budget, always.
That's a unique insight, and I just, for everybody here, one of my struggles in my career has always been balancing what you just described, the two of you just described, a marketing or even a CEO's desire to tell people the good news and to shoot for the stars, but then to balance between, I'm going to talk to my investors, I'm going to talk to my internal team, and we got to know what we're operating from. We got to know what kind of cost structure we want out of this. And I've seen a lot of companies go under from the simple fact that they shot for the stars and then budgeted the stars.
Totally.
Yep.
Right? And is that what you're saying essentially?
Exactly.
Yeah, he works with Tyler on the product team. He empowers him. He strategizes with him to launch new products in 2020. But do you think any of those are baked into the safety net of 2020 for Divvy? No, we're not reliant on any of those. Any one of those doesn't need to massively succeed for Divvy to still be a grand slam in 2020. We just don't think that way.
That's a great example of balancing the budget, let's call it. But hitting numbers, that's a big deal. I've always struggled with that. Do you guys have that issue at Holiday Oil?
Oh, it's a never-ending deal, right, of trying to balance that conflict out. For us, obviously, more of a, I guess, traditional model, right, in the fact that, we've been around, we know what we're doing. So for us, it's a matter of investing in real estate, right, to build a station. We're spending about $3.5 million to build a station. And so how much money can you spend on real estate, right? How much money? And so, again, going through those models of being able to say, what is realistic? Again, shooting for the stars. What do we project we can do in cells and gallons and so forth? And saying, what is realistic? I really liked, what Blake talked about, the sparring partner. James and I spend a lot of time together talking about what if, right? What about this? What about that? What if this happens? What if that happens? And so because of that relationship, that really makes a difference in how well you function as a team. Exactly what he said, that no matter what happens, you disagree, you look at things differently, but you still maintain that relationship. And to be able to have that kind of trust with one another really makes a difference in the long run.
Great. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. We've talked a lot about this, but I want to read this one and so you can think a little bit about it. Many acknowledge that the Office of CFO, through their responsibility for budgeting, ensuring returns across the organization, gives the CFO a broader perspective on the business than others of his or her peers. I always thought I had a broader perspective than the marketing person, but only if I cared about marketing, right? I'm going to caveat that a little bit. That said, how does this enhance the CFO's ability to lead out on organizational change?
I have a perspective here because there's no way we would ever know as much as a marketing person about all the details of marketing. Mm-hmm. But I do think we have this breadth of understanding of what the business requires for it to be successful. I feel like half my job is just helping teach the rest of the business about some of that. Hey, here's what painting the picture of what the future of the business needs to look like for it to be successful, right? And then explaining to them why, if there's, think of marketing, if we're talking about increasing efficiencies, not just saying, hey, you need to be more efficient. No, it's painting the picture of what is the goal of our business and what do we need to see from everybody so that we can become better and more efficient. And that way it's a team a team goal of how everybody's aligned on these trajectories versus, hey, because this is the emotional intelligence, I think, is a lot of, it can feel sensitive, like I need you to get more efficient, and here's why, versus, hey, here's our goals as a business, and you have a part to play in that. I think it's easier for groups to digest that.
Yeah, the way that we manage Divvy is by outcomes instead of inputs, is that we discuss and we land on and agree upon outcomes that we think are hopeful, but then realistic, and then we work backwards in a very detailed manner. And Blakely and his team require then that each leader gets understands the details and the steps that are required to achieve the outcome that they need. Think of what Blakely just talked about, though, right there. Lots of stuff, but also he was talking about stakeholder communication, of helping then the leaders and their workforce understand what it will take to achieve their outcomes. He's able to paint a picture that oftentimes that they're missing, and he helps them understand kind of the broader story of where they fit into the business ecosystem.
And can I say vice versa to this too, is we have, like my team, we have a value, our own personal values on the team, and one of the key values that I think is important for finance people is seek to understand before you seek to be understood. So we're far from perfect at this, but we work really hard to listen to whatever group, department, function, leader is trying to accomplish first, so that we can be working towards what they're trying to accomplish, and not just talking about all the restrictions we have for them.
Yeah, so I would add, the term I like is high-performing teams, right? How do you get and pick the right team members to be able to work together, right? I enjoy sports and working with others to achieve a goal, and really, when it really comes down to, that's what business is, right? You have to align enough people to be able to go out and do what needs to be done. But that alignment part, that is a challenge. And the more diverse your team is, the more value that's there, but yet sometimes that makes it harder to get everybody on the same team or on the same page. So really creating a high-performance team of being able to take different and unique perspectives and bring that all together, and then get everybody to trust one another to be able to say, yes, maybe I don't agree exactly, but you know what, I'm behind you now as a team, and then go out and execute that goal that you've set for one another. That's a key piece, right? And the CFO ends up being a major piece in that executive team to be able to fit that together, to be able to go out and execute.
Wonderful. So in today's world, I've seen CFOs run a lot of different parts of organizations. I've got two other questions, and I want to leave a little bit of time for a few questions from the group. But are there some areas of change that, if any, that you expect your CFO to lead out that aren't traditionally a part of the office of the CFO or office of the executive finance organization?
I don't think it. Not traditional, I don't know. At Divvy, he's already so involved in the strategic side, so it's literally chief financial, but probably chief strategy as well, as to what Blakely is responsible for, and what he just naturally, again, he spoke to that. His entire career predating Divvy was on the strategy side. Blakely, though, maybe there's a non-traditional side. He's more of a people person probably than our people team is even, right? And so he leads the charge and leads the front of making sure that people are happy, that they're empowered, that they're enabled, that they have what they need. If we can't give them everything that they need, that we're at least scratching a lot of the itches that they might have. And he just takes that on as his day-to-day burden. That's just a natural kind of part of his personality of kind of the yin to my yang, where I'm a little more introverted. He is the epitome of an extrovert, right? Talking it up and chumming it up with everyone and making sure they're happy and satisfied. And so he leads the charge on the people side for sure. So formal or not, that's where he's at. Yeah.
Great example.
Yeah, so to add to those thoughts, really, as I see a CFO, and this is where, James and I just had this conversation the other day. I have about 10 people that report to me, really, but what my goal ends up being is paring that down to probably 4 people, and James being one of those. And so a lot of those people that are reporting to me right now, that's really our long-term goal, are those people report to James. So as we continue to build out that, relationship of being able to transition and make those things happen, as James takes on more responsibility, and has a better handle on all aspects of the business, that will make that transition easier to make that happen. And ultimately, I mean, that's really the goal of being able to transfer that leadership, that ability for more people to be able to do more things. We really came from an organization where there was a few people who really did everything. And so we've gone through the last several years of spending a lot of time of trying to really diversify and give more people, creating committees that there's chairmen for those committees that can make decisions in their own departments, but yet still have a reporting mechanism that it still comes through at a capital improvement committee that has to approve, you know, the amount of money that they want to spend in different aspects of the business. So we've started that process, and James has been a huge part of that.
Wonderful. Okay, so I want to leave a little bit of time if there are some questions. I got one more, but I'd love some questions from the audience. Ask about their business or about their relationships. Anything from the audience. We've got about 4 minutes left. Go ahead. Nice and loud.
So it seems like you all have pretty good relationships with each other. You're okay being sparring partner. You're okay getting arguments and go to lunch later or whatever it is. Have you had situations where you didn't have that relationship with a business partner, and how did you manage it?
So the question is the sparring partner concept and still being able to go to lunch with each other. Have you had situations where that was not the case, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, so I can
Good
speak
question.
to that. My experience, right, from a family business perspective, right, so CFO before obviously was more aligned with my dad, right, and so as we went through that transition piece, I mean, it made life hell, right? There were times where, you know, it just was not fun coming to work, and that's nobody wants to be in that situation. So for me personally, I dealt with that for years and years of trying to be able to balance that. You know, emotionally, that was rough to never be in alignment or to always, you know, I guess the bottom line is no, right? This constant no, instead of being able to understand why you're saying no, to just having this constant no. So that relationship. So when we talk about CFOs being the guardrails, right? I like that analogy, but ultimately, what I see the difference between a controller just saying no versus a CFO saying no, and this is why I think no, right? Let's talk through this, and you understand and you get other people to understand your perspective, then they understand why. Now we can all move forward. But if you're just told no, nobody likes to hear that. So anyway, that's my experience.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I feel this isn't the CFO's sole burden. This is also my burden to make it work. And so the CEO carries, I think, a pretty significant responsibility to create an environment, especially kind of a one-to-one environment, where they are open to criticism, open to the kind of the sparring match, if you will. The ability to even get to that point in any relationship, CFO, CEO, you know, whatever, co-founder, is predicated on trust, is that you know that the table stakes are being taken care of. So to speak from experience, that in the times where I haven't had that relationship with an executive, it's because I can't trust them to get their job done, because the alignment might not be there, because they've let the business down. Not me. They've let the business down in some way or fashion. Not from the results outcome perspective, but because some of the table stakes likely hadn't been objectively taken care of, not from a subjective kind of management perspective. When that trust is eroded, I'm looking for something else, and I'm looking for a different solution. When it's there, that opens up, because my brain just moves past it because I have such incredible trust in Blakely and his team, then that almost gives me permission to turn on that switch of, okay, let's really start investing in this relationship and open it up to that sparring match, if you will.
Great answers. One more question from the group? Back here in the back?
I want to know, what is the most impactful or insightful deliverable you've received from the CFO and finance team? Something that really helped you see things from a different perspective, or, you know, helped make you think, like the data presentation, what did it look like? So
Single most impactful thing, but it sounds like you're
Yeah.
looking for from an informational perspective.
Yeah, from an informational perspective, like was it a KPI or some sort of metrics or a dash, like something that the finance team can give you that really helps you with the strategy part of your business?
So from our business and what we do, I mean, those financials, there's only so many different ways to look at things, and I think we've done that for the most part. So again, to me, the most impactful side ends up being that relationship, right? Sometime being the CEO, I mean, you know, you hear the cliche, you know, it's a lonely place. It's true, right? Everybody, to some degree, is frustrated because they're not getting what they want, and so you're dealing with multiple facets of the business, and everybody's telling you different things, and to be able to have a partner that says, yeah, that makes sense, or no, that doesn't make sense, that's truly, from a CFO perspective, that relationship that you have there, that really makes the difference. You know, the nuts and bolts, the financials, the ratios, all the things that we're looking at, different things, those end up being a given that you just do, that's day-to-day business. It's really being able to get past that and being able to have, from an emotional perspective, what's going to make this work? Why does this work, or why does that not work? So I really believe that trust, that relationship ends up being the biggest part for me that makes a difference.
Like the storytelling.
I'll take a quick swing at this one. There's a couple different ways that I think you can do it, but it's documented communication is kind of the lame response. And what I mean by that is this isn't about just preparing a board deck, right, which is going to be 80 pages, it's going to be detailed, it's going to be pretty, it's going to be branded. Blakely and their team prepare. They spin up information in decks in a digestible way for stakeholders same day within hours. So whether it's a memo, right, which is kind of the Amazon approach, is being able to communicate complexity in a very concise manner, so that way anyone can take the memo. It's going to be anywhere from 6 to 9 paragraphs, and I understand what you're trying to communicate, what's the opportunity, and how to achieve it. Okay, great. If you're not comfortable with your writing skills, because you need to be a good writer to write a concise memo, then being able to communicate that in some kind of deck. That is easily, there's no magic KPI. All of our KPIs are totally different. Even at Divvy, I care about one thing right now. It's going to shift fundamentally next year. It just is, right? So I don't anchor ourselves too much on any one dashboard. That's a pretty flexible component of our business. But again, it's the communication of complex ideas in short form, though. Yeah.
Great. So we're out of time. I want one, look, it doesn't have to be the ultimate, but in less than 2 sentences, if you gave advice simple advice to an upcoming finance executive, what would you tell them either for their career or their personal lives? What comes to mind that you might give them some advice? I'd love to, for each of you, just give a shot at that, and then we'll close at that.
Become a great speaker.
Good one. Some of the finance people in the room are going, oh,
Yeah, no. For me, be flexible, be what your company needs at the moment it needs it.
Thoughts, Blakely and Mike?
I like Blake kind of said this, but I always say, fight hard, then go to lunch.
Yeah.
So my theme has been through the whole panel here today is emotional intelligence, right? And I think some of that has to do with being able to present yourself in such a way that others have respect for you. You know, I think we're all the same, and for you as a CFO to be able to treat, you know, the latest clerk you just hired, or in our case, cashier, to, you know, the president or the owner of the company or other executives that you meet with, and to be able to treat them all the same is such a gift. And that's what I see in some people. Others, you know, really struggle with that. So again, to me, emotional intelligence of being able to know how to deal with others. Communication obviously is a huge part of that, but being able to deal with other people and have good relationships with everybody makes a huge difference, I believe.
Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you to everybody in the audience, and give it up for our panel.